You came. Jessica's voice dripped with sugar, each word a tiny barb. She surveyed me head to toe, wedding dress a blinding white. Brandon just stared, slack-jawed. They thought I'd crumble, exposed. Little did they know. 3 years reduced to not good enough, discarded for a trust fund. I gripped his hand, a silent promise. Alexander, a stranger weeks ago, now my lifeline. He squeezed back, warmth against the ice in my veins. They see a simple bookstore girl. They haven't a clue he owns half this town. He squeezed my hand. Let them underestimate, because a quiet act of kindness is about to unravel their perfect little world. They have no idea how her quiet kindness will change everything. Before I tell you how I completely flipped the script on my ex's cruel joke, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. Now let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Kristen, and 6 months ago, I was living what most people would call a simple life. I worked at a small bookstore downtown, lived in a cozy one-bedroom apartment, and spent my evenings reading novels and sipping tea. There was nothing glamorous about my existence. But I was content, or at least I thought I was. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was sorting through the mail when I saw it, a thick golden envelope with my name written in elegant calligraphy. My heart stopped. I recognized that handwriting immediately. It was from Brandon, my ex-boyfriend of 3 years who had left me 8 months earlier for someone with a trust fund and a designer wardrobe. I stood there in my tiny kitchen holding this expensive invitation, and I could already feel the familiar sting of humiliation creeping up my chest. Brandon and I had dated through college and beyond. He was charming, ambitious, and for 3 years I thought he loved me for who I was. But as his career and finance took off and he started mixing with wealthy clients, I began to notice the changes. The way he'd cringe when I wore my favorite vintage dress to his company parties, how he'd suggest I dress up a bit more when we went to nice restaurants. The subtle comments about my simple lifestyle that cut deeper each time. When he finally left me, he didn't even have the decency to break up with me properly. He just started dating Jessica, a socialite whose father owned 3 hotels, and whose idea of casual wear cost more than my monthly rent. I found out through social media, seeing their pictures together at charity galas and wine tastings, places I could never afford to go. But this invitation, this was next-level cruelty. As I opened it, my hands were actually shaking. Inside was a beautiful card announcing the wedding of Brandon Mitchell and Jessica Worthington at the prestigious Rosewood Garden Estate. The date was set for 3 weeks away, and there was a handwritten note at the bottom. Hope you can make it, Kristen. It would mean so much to have you there. B&J, I laughed out loud, but it wasn't a happy sound. It was the bitter laugh of someone who finally understood just how cruel people could be. They weren't inviting me because they wanted me there. They were inviting me because they wanted to parade their perfect life in front of the girl who wasn't good enough. They wanted me to sit in that audience, probably in my best dress from Target, and watch them exchange vows in what I later learned was a $15,000 venue. For the first few days, I tried to ignore it. I threw the invitation in my junk drawer and went about my life. But every time I opened that drawer, I could see that golden edge peeking out, mocking me. My friends told me to just ignore it, to not give them the satisfaction. But something inside me rebelled against that idea. Why should I hide? Why should I let them win by making me too ashamed to show my face? I made a decision that surprised even myself. I was going to that wedding. I didn't know how, but I wasn't going to let Brandon and Jessica have their moment of triumph at my expense. I may have been simple, but I wasn't weak. That's when fate stepped in, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and carrying a leather briefcase. It was a Thursday morning, and I was running late for work. I'd stopped at my favorite coffee shop, the little place on 5th Street, where they knew my order by heart. I was rushing to grab my usual latte when I bumped into someone hard. Coffee went flying everywhere, splattering across his expensive-looking gray suit and onto his shoes that probably cost more than my car payment. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," I practically shouted, grabbing napkins and trying to dab at the mess I'd made. "I'm such a klutz. I'm so sorry. Let me pay for dry cleaning." "Hey, it's okay," he said, and his voice was warm, amused even. "Really, it's just a suit." I looked up at him, then really looked, and felt my breath catch. He was probably in his early 40s with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confident posture that spoke of success. But his eyes were kind, and he was smiling at me like spilling coffee on strangers was the most delightful thing that had happened to him all week. "Just a suit?" I repeated, still frantically dabbing at the stains. "This looks like it costs more than my monthly salary." He laughed, a genuine rich sound that made something warm flutter in my chest. "Well, then I guess I'll have to buy a cheaper suit next time." He gently took the napkins from my hands. "I'm Alexander, by the way, and you are Kristen." I managed feeling heat creep up my neck. "And I'm really truly sorry about your suit." "Kristen," he repeated like he was testing how my name sounded. "Well, Kristen, since you've already ruined my morning outfit, would you like to grab coffee with me? I mean, I was going to get one anyway, and you clearly need one too, if you're running around assaulting innocent businessmen." I couldn't help but laugh. "I don't assault innocent businessmen, only the guilty ones." "Ah, well, I suppose I'll have to confess my crimes then." His smile was infectious. "I'm guilty of being in the wrong place at the wrong time and of wearing ridiculously expensive suits to coffee shops." That's how I found myself sitting across from Alexander in a corner booth, sharing stories and laughing harder than I had in months. He was intelligent, funny, and surprisingly down to earth for someone who clearly had money. He asked about my work at the bookstore, and when I mentioned my favorite authors, his eyes lit up with genuine interest. We talked about everything from classic literature to our favorite places to travel, though I had to admit my travel experience was limited to a few weekend trips. What struck me most was how he listened. Really listened. When I talked about my love for old books and the smell of paper and ink, he didn't look bored or condescending. He seemed genuinely fascinated by my passion, asking questions about first editions and rare finds. It had been so long since someone had made me feel like my thoughts and interests mattered. When we finally parted ways, him to his office, me to the bookstore, he asked if he could see me again. I said yes without hesitation, though part of me wondered what someone like him could possibly want with someone like me. The next day, he showed up at the bookstore. I was helping a customer find a cookbook when I looked up and saw him browsing the philosophy section, completely absorbed in a book about existentialism. He looked so natural there, surrounded by books, that for a moment I forgot about the expensive suit and the confident air of success. He was just a man who loved to read. "Find anything interesting?" I asked when the customer had left. "Actually, yes," he said, showing me the book. "Sartre, I haven't read this one in years. Do you know his work?" We spent the next hour discussing philosophy, literature, and life. He bought 3 books that day, but I suspect he could have gotten them anywhere. He was there for the conversation, for the connection. When he left, he asked if I'd like to have dinner with him that weekend. Our first real date was at a small Italian restaurant. Nothing fancy, but the food was incredible, and the atmosphere was cozy. Alexander fit right in, charming the elderly owner in broken Italian and making me laugh until my sides hurt. It was perfect, except for the nagging voice in my head that kept asking what would happen when he realized I wasn't sophisticated enough for his world. It was during our third date that I finally told him about the wedding invitation. We were walking through the park after dinner, and I'd been unusually quiet. He noticed, of course. He seemed to notice everything about me. "What's on your mind?" he asked, stopping by a bench overlooking the pond. I pulled the invitation from my purse. I'd been carrying it around like some kind of masochistic reminder of my place in the world. "My ex-boyfriend is getting married," I said, handing it to him. Alexander read it carefully, his expression growing more serious with each word. "And you're going?" "I want to," I admitted. "I know it sounds stupid, but I'm tired of feeling like I need to hide from my own life. They invited me because they think I'm pathetic, because they want to rub their perfect wedding in my face. But I'm not going to give them that satisfaction." He was quiet for a long moment, and I worried I'd revealed too much about my messy past, but when he looked at me, there was something fierce in his eyes. "Tell me about him," he said simply. So I did. I told him about Brandon, about how he'd slowly chipped away at my confidence over the years, how he'd made me feel like I wasn't good enough for his world, wasn't sophisticated enough, wasn't wealthy enough, how he'd left me for someone who could match his ambitions and his bank account. He sounds like an idiot, Alexander said when I finished. I laughed, but it was shaky. Maybe, but he wasn't wrong about me not fitting into his world. Alexander turned to face me fully. Kristen, can I tell you something? I've been in that world my entire adult life. I've been to countless charity galas, business dinners, and social events. Do you know what I've learned? Most of those people are desperately boring. They talk about the same things, wear the same clothes, and have the same opinions. They're so afraid of being different that they've forgotten how to be interesting. He reached over and took my hand. You, on the other hand, are the most interesting person I've met in years. You're passionate about things that matter. You're kind to everyone you meet. You have opinions and dreams and a beautiful way of seeing the world. If your ex couldn't see that, then he's not just an idiot. He's a fool. That night, Alexander made me an offer that changed everything. Let me take you to that wedding, he said. Let me show you how it feels to walk into a room knowing you're exactly where you belong. I wanted to say no. It felt too much like charity, like pity. But something in his eyes told me this wasn't about pity at all. This was about justice. The next 2 weeks became a whirlwind of preparation. Alexander insisted on taking me shopping, and I quickly learned that money really could buy confidence. We went to boutiques I'd only ever walked past, where the saleswoman treated me like royalty simply because I was with him. I tried on dress after dress until we found the perfect one, a stunning emerald green gown that made my eyes sparkle and my skin glow. It cost more than I made in 3 months, but Alexander waved away my protests. You're not paying me back, he said firmly. This is my gift to you. Besides, I have a feeling I'm going to get far more out of this than you are. The day of the wedding arrived faster than I expected. I spent the morning getting ready with professionals that Alexander had hired to do my hair and makeup. They didn't change who I was, they just enhanced what was already there. When I looked in the mirror, I saw myself, but better, confident, radiant, beautiful. Alexander arrived to pick me up in a sleek silver car with a driver. He was wearing a perfectly tailored tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. But when he saw me, his expression was so soft, so genuinely appreciative, that I felt beautiful from the inside out. You look incredible, he said, and I believed him. The drive to Rosewood Garden Estate took about 30 minutes, and with each mile I felt my courage building. Alexander held my hand the entire way, occasionally squeezing it in reassurance. We talked about everything except the wedding, books, travel, his work in real estate development. I learned he owned several properties around the city, but he spoke about his work with such passion that it was clear he built things because he loved creating something lasting, not just for the money. When we pulled up to the venue, I gasped. Rosewood Garden Estate was even more beautiful than I'd imagined. The ceremony was being held in a manicured garden with white roses everywhere, fairy lights strung between the trees and elegant white chairs arranged in perfect rows. It was like something out of a fairy tale, which made sense because Jessica had always wanted to be a princess. As we walked up the garden path, I could feel eyes on us. Wedding guests were already mingling, holding champagne flutes and admiring the flowers. I recognized some faces, college friends, mutual acquaintances from Brandon's work, and I could see the exact moment when they recognized me. The whispers started immediately. I heard fragments as we passed. Is that Kristen? Who is that, man? She looks incredible. I didn't think she was coming. But the real moment came when Brandon saw me. He was standing near the altar, presumably waiting for his cue to take his place. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, I had to admit. But when his eyes found mine across the garden, his face went completely white. His mouth actually fell open. Jessica appeared at his side a moment later, resplendent in what was clearly a designer wedding dress. She followed Brandon's gaze and spotted me. The look on her face was priceless. Shock, confusion, and something that might have been panic. This clearly wasn't how they'd expected this to go. Alexander seemed to sense my nerves because he leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Remember, you belong here just as much as anyone else. More, actually." "Why more?" I whispered back. He smiled, "Because you're the only one here who's genuinely happy." The ceremony itself was beautiful, I had to admit. Brandon and Jessica exchanged vows under an arch of white roses as the sun began to set behind them. They looked perfect together, two beautiful people promising to love each other forever. But I found myself watching Alexander more than the bride and groom. He held my hand throughout the ceremony, occasionally glancing at me with such warmth that I forgot to feel bitter about my ex getting married. During the reception, everything changed. The garden had been transformed with string lights and flowing white fabric. Round tables were scattered throughout the space, each decorated with towering centerpieces of white flowers. It was elegant, expensive, and exactly the kind of wedding Jessica had always dreamed of. But as we mingled during the cocktail hour, I noticed something interesting. People were treating me differently. The same college friends who had barely acknowledged me at Brandon's work parties were now approaching me with genuine smiles. Old acquaintances who used to look right through me were suddenly very interested in catching up. Everyone wanted to know about my mysterious companion. Alexander handled it all with grace, charming everyone he met while never making me feel like I was in his shadow. He had a way of including me in every conversation, asking for my opinions and making it clear that he valued what I had to say. I watched him work the room and realized this wasn't an act for him. This was just who he was, confident, kind, and completely comfortable in his own skin. That's when Brandon approached us. I saw him coming across the garden, and my heart started racing. Alexander must have sensed my tension because he moved slightly closer, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture that was both protective and supportive. "Kristen," Brandon said, his voice careful and polite, "I'm so glad you came. You look amazing." "Thank you," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "It's a beautiful wedding. Congratulations." Brandon's eyes kept darting to Alexander, clearly trying to figure out who he was and how I'd ended up with him. "I don't think we've met," he said finally, extending his hand. "I'm Brandon, the groom." "Alexander," came the reply, and his handshake was firm and confident. "Congratulations on your wedding. Kristen has told me so much about you." I had to bite back a smile at Brandon's expression. He clearly wasn't sure whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. "So how do you two know each other?" Brandon asked, his curiosity getting the better of his manners. "We met at a coffee shop," Alexander said smoothly. "Kristen literally ran into me. Best accident of my life." The way he said it with such genuine affection made my heart skip, but I could see Brandon processing this information, trying to figure out how serious we were, how long we'd been together. "Well," Brandon said awkwardly, "I should get back to Jessica, but maybe we could catch up later, Kristen. I'd love to hear what you've been up to." After he walked away, Alexander turned to me with raised eyebrows. "That was interesting." "What do you mean?" "He's having second thoughts," Alexander said simply. "I can see it in his eyes. He's looking at you tonight and realizing what he gave up." I wanted to dismiss it, but deep down I wondered if Alexander was right. There had been something in Brandon's expression, a wistfulness that I'd never seen before. The evening continued, and I found myself actually enjoying the party. The food was incredible, the band was fantastic, and Alexander was the perfect companion. He danced with me under the stars, spinning me around the dance floor like we were the only two people in the world. I felt beautiful, confident, and for the first time in months, truly happy. But the real drama came during the speeches. Jessica's father had just finished a touching toast about love and family when the bandleader announced that Alexander had asked to say a few words. I looked at him in surprise. He hadn't mentioned wanting to speak. Alexander stood up, and the garden fell silent. He had that kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. "Thank you," he began, his voice carrying easily across the garden. "I don't usually speak at weddings, but tonight feels special." He looked down at me and his smile was soft. "I want to thank Brandon and Jessica for bringing us all together tonight. It's not often you get to celebrate love in such a beautiful setting. Speaking of which, I should probably mention that I own this estate." A ripple of surprise went through the crowd. I felt my own mouth fall open. Alexander owned Rosewood Garden Estate, the venue that had cost Brandon and Jessica a fortune to book. Alexander continued, completely unfazed by the reaction. "I've been in real estate development for 20 years, and I've built and bought many properties, But this garden will always be special to me because it's where I got to watch the most incredible woman I know show the world exactly who she is. He looked at me again, and I felt tears prick my eyes. Kristen, you are kind, intelligent, passionate, and beautiful inside and out. Anyone who couldn't see that was blind. Their loss is my gain. The crowd was eating it up, but I could see Brandon and Jessica at the head table, both looking stunned. This was clearly not how they'd expected the evening to go. In honor of this beautiful celebration, Alexander continued, I'd like to announce that I'm donating the entire cost of tonight's venue to the Literacy Foundation that Kristen volunteers with. Because if tonight has taught me anything, it's that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. They can only be recognized, cherished, and celebrated. The applause was thunderous. People were standing, clapping, and I could hear murmurs of approval throughout the crowd. But I only had eyes for Alexander, who was looking at me like I was the most precious thing in the world. As he sat back down, I reached for his hand. Did you really just donate $15,000 to charity? I whispered. Actually, it was $25,000, he said casually. And yes, best money I've ever spent. I felt overwhelmed by his generosity, by his kindness, by the way he turned what was supposed to be my humiliation into my triumph. But more than that, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a long time. I felt worthy of love. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. People kept approaching our table to compliment us, to ask about Alexander's work, to tell me how happy I looked. Brandon tried to approach me again, but Alexander smoothly intercepted him, engaging him in a conversation about real estate that somehow never quite gave Brandon the opening he was looking for. When it was time to leave, Alexander and I walked slowly back through the garden paths, the fairy lights twinkling above us like stars. I felt like I was in a dream, like at any moment I might wake up back in my small apartment, alone and ordinary. Thank you, I said as we reached the car, for everything, for tonight, for the dress, for making me feel like I belonged there. Alexander stopped walking and turned to face me. Kristen, you need to understand something. You didn't belong there because of the dress, or because of me, or because of anything I did. You belong there because you're remarkable. You always were. I just helped you see it. He cupped my face gently in his hands. Your ex-boyfriend is an idiot who traded a diamond for fool's gold. His loss, remember? As we drove away from Rosewood Garden Estate, I looked back at the glowing lights and the celebration still going on. 6 months ago, I would have said that Brandon and Jessica got their perfect wedding, but now I knew better. They got their expensive wedding, their photo-perfect moment, their social media dream. But what they didn't get was what I had found. Someone who saw me for who I really was and loved me, not in spite of my simplicity, but because of my authenticity. The invitation that was meant to humiliate me had become the catalyst for the most wonderful night of my life. And as Alexander took my hand in the back seat of that car, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything you never knew you deserved. 3 months later, Alexander and I were engaged. Not because he wanted to prove a point or because I wanted to show off to my ex, but because somewhere between coffee shop conversations and garden party revelations, we had fallen deeply, genuinely in love. The simple girl who wasn't good enough for her ex-boyfriend had found someone who thought she was more than enough. She was everything. Sometimes the universe has a funny way of balancing things out. What Brandon and Jessica meant as a cruel joke became the beginning of the most beautiful chapter of my life. Alexander didn't just help me get revenge. He helped me discover my own worth. If this story inspired you to never let anyone make you feel small, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. And remember, your worth isn't determined by your bank account. It's determined by the size of your heart. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know in the comments below.